No. Okay, so today is the 13th of Tammuz, and the 2nd of July.
My parents' wedding anniversary.
My parents' wedding anniversary, and the day on which the Friedrich Rebbe was able to get out of the clutches of the Soviet regime.
The Friedrich Rebbe's birthday yesterday.
That was yesterday, and
wrong,
today. No, I said it was yesterday, and today is the day that he was released. In any case, what we want to do now is we want to learn the other mimer, and this is actually related to this week. Now everybody in the whole world is reading the same parsha, Pinchas. And in Parshas Pinchas is where, in Likutei Torah, is where the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, revisited these two short essays. The first one we learned last week about Lo Tochlu al Adam, you shouldn't eat before you daven. Right? And there he explained why Talmud Torah was different. And now he's going to tell us the more basic understanding of what it means that what's going on with the blood. What's the whole thing with the blood here? Why is this related to the blood in general? And this whole thing he revisited in Likutei Torah and Pinchas. So this is actually a mimer for this week. And I think we'll finish this today, hopefully, if not tomorrow. And then we'll switch to look at the longer mimer in Likutei Torah. Okay? In Likutei Torah, it's Ayin Tet Amud Daled if you want to see it before. In any case. The saying of the Talmud that we saw from Brachos 10b, you should not eat with blood, which means... You're in the right side. Which means you shouldn't eat before you pray for your blood. What does it mean to pray for or pray on your blood, as it were? It literally means on your blood. You pray on your blood, not for. I mean, that's what it means conceptually, but literally it's you should pray on your blood. And we'll see that this is it fits very well. Anoten shalom lechavero, okay? A little bit later it says, a person who greets his friend before he's prayed, ki'ilu bana bama. It's as if he's built a private altar, which is forbidden, right? כדכתיב, חידלו לכם מן האדם אשר נשמה באפו, כל אשר נשמה באפו. Refrain from the person whose soul is in his nose. Okay? This we didn't see yet. We sort of mentioned it, but we didn't see the Talmud that said this. The Talmud passage that said this. Meaning refrain, there's a verse. It says in Mishlei, in Proverbs, refrain from the person who's literally would mean like, not literally, conceptually would mean like his breath is in his nostril. What do you mean by that? Figuratively, it means literally, his soul is in his nostrils. His soul is in his nose. We'll see later on that the Zohar gives a completely different understanding of this, which is much closer to the Pshat. It's a very interesting case where the Zohar gives us a much closer to the literal understanding.
I don't understand what you're saying. What are you trying to say? You mustn't say hello to your friend?
Right. You can't say hello to your friend.
Endangering your life?
No. Because he has his breath, he has his soul in his nose.
So you're endangering his life?
No, you shouldn't say it. We'll see in a moment why. Okay. Yuvan al pi ma shekatuv b'Zohar. Now he's bringing a different Zohar. This Zohar is from the beginning of the Zohar, the Akdama of the Zohar. The Akdama of the Zohar says, שכשאדם בשינתו מסתלק ממנו החלק אלוקי, והמשיכה לו היא רוחא דמסבה שהוא נפש אדם חילא דדמא. When a person is asleep, the divine part of his soul retreats. Right? It's gone. It elevates. It goes up.
But all his neshama is divine.
No. So in the Zohar doesn't make the distinction. Right? The Zohar doesn't have the language of a divine soul and an animal soul. That comes much later in the Ari. But before the Ari, there was no clear indication that there are two souls. So when you read the Zohar, what did you read? So let's read it literally. It says,
in Shema, everybody knows it.
Yetzarim. It's talking about two Yetzarim, two inclinations. But the language of there being two souls wasn't yet adapted. The sages don't talk about two souls. They talk about two inclinations. That's what I said. It's inclinations. Yetzarim, but not souls. Where's the proof in the end that you can talk about two souls? That we know from Yeshaya. It says, Neshamot ani asiti. Uneshamot ani asiti. And I have made souls. So from that you learn that there are two souls. At least two souls, right? That's the verse from which...
Yeshaya, then you know it already by the time of the Zohar.
Right, but nobody connected the two. Or at least they didn't say it openly. But the language was still a language of inclinations. It wasn't a language of that you have an entire corpus of faculties that is connected either above or below. The feeling was that you're one, like the Rambam, like Maimonides would tell you. Everything in the end is one. There was no such concept that the two are like two separate entities. And again, we don't say in the end really there are really two. Like it's not an ontological identification that there are two souls entirely different. Ontological. It's not that there's physically two different things. Because when we're talking about spirituality, it's not exactly physical things. Okay? But let's try to understand. Because this is one of the sources. This is one of the most important sources for understanding why it is that we say that there are two different souls, as it were. Okay? Now notice that what does he say? He already says a chelek eloki. The Alter Rebbe, when he explains the Zohar, from the introduction to the Zohar, he says the divine part elevates. It recedes. It retreats back to its source. And what's left? Because it's retreated, he doesn't say, okay, so now you're an animal soul. The Zohar doesn't say that. He says instead, what do you have on you? Rucha de mesava, an impure spirit. Shehu nefesh adam chayda dedama. That's called, when we say that the soul, that the blood is the soul, hanefesh hu adam, adam hu hanefesh. It says in both ways in the Torah. We'll talk more about this later. So that is talking about this impure spirit. And what is that? Chayda dedama, the power of the blood. So what's going on here? When you go to sleep in the middle of the day, what happens if you sleep more than 30 minutes? What do you have to do when you wake up? Why? Because we say, according to the Zohar, that after 30 minutes, according to the Zohar and the Talmud, I'll say in a moment, you probably know why in the Talmud says that, but after 30 minutes, you've been defiled. Shloshim. Not Shloshim, Shishim. We'll get to it in a second. So you've been defiled. The body's been defiled. Because death is 1/60th of, sleep is 1/60th of death. There's something about sleep that causes you to be defiled. So what's the defilement? What are you talking about? Okay? So we just said, why half an hour? Because they learned that from King David. It says that King David would sleep like a horse. What does it mean he slept like a horse? He wouldn't sleep for more than 60 breaths. What does that even mean? Our breath is 18 per minute. That's high breaths per minute. That's like a famous thing. Right? It's 3 1/3 seconds for each breath. That's the average when a person's at rest. So if you say that he slept for 60 breaths, he hardly slept for 4 minutes. So every 4 minutes he'd wake up and wash his hands. It doesn't make any sense. You can't sleep, you can't live that way. So the understanding is, if you get into the Sugya and the Talmud deeply, you'll see that the meaning is 60 breaths of a horse who's sleeping. Now I don't know, I don't have a horse at home, so I've never clocked his breath when he's asleep. But I went to search, and I'm not the first one to do this. You can find commentaries that did this. You go to watch a horse sleeping, and you see how many breaths does this huge animal take when it's asleep. It says it's 2 breaths a minute. Okay, so if it's 60 breaths of a horse, that's 30 minutes. That's where the 30 minutes came from. So now so it all has to do with breath. There's no question. I mean, here it doesn't say that in the Zohar. It's saying when you go to sleep, then your higher soul is elevated. It's not there, and instead you become defiled by the power of the blood itself. So now what's going on? What are we trying to say here? What's the whole story with the blood? The blood by itself is just a vehicle. What's it a vehicle for? A vehicle for many things, but the most important thing, that we mentioned this last week, the most important thing that it's a vehicle for is for oxygen. It oxygenates the cells, everything. There's no life without it. That's what we mean when we say there's life force in it. Of course, there's also other nutrients, there's plasma, there's a ton of stuff there. But the most important thing, which is why it circulates, and it has to circulate so fast, is because it has to provide oxygen. So what is the oxygen like? What's the image? The image is that the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. This came as a surprise to me. I didn't know this. But in the 11th century, they already knew about what we call, I don't even remember what it's called. I studied this in college. I don't remember what it's called. It's the air pressure above a liquid. You probably know more about that because you study chemistry. So there's air pressure about, if you put liquid in a vacuum, so eventually you'll get a certain pressure of air. There's going to be dissipation, but it's not dissipation, it's evaporation, or whatever they call it, itaidut, of the liquid, and gases will escape, and you'll get gas above the liquid, and you'll come to a certain pressure at which point the liquid cannot free any more gases, right? You get an equilibrium state. So the verse that reflects that is the Spirit of God who was hovering above the waters. What does that mean? So when you look in the Ibn Ezra, for instance, and we talked about this last week, because Rav Ginsburg mentioned this in this class, and it's not because I know the Ibn Ezra so well. So there's the oxygen, they called it the air. They knew this already in the 11th century, that the blood was carrying gas with it. They didn't know how. They didn't know it was actually in the platelets, or the red blood cells. They didn't know that. That they didn't know yet. But they imagined that it was like any liquid that they saw that had gas above it. And so they had this theory, and we just have a better one. Like I said, I'm not a scientist. I've never done any of these experiments. I don't know if they're true. I imagine that if you study this in a chemistry class in college, it's probably true, and you maybe have done some experiments to see it. So they had this vision. What does it mean that the blood is the soul? That there is a certain amount of gas being. Where does the gas come from? You're breathing. So there's two states in which the gas in the blood can be. Either when you're awake or when you're asleep. When you're awake, hopefully, what is this gas supposed to reflect? Your divine soul. When you're asleep, because you can't do what? You don't think Torah, that's for sure. And you don't speak, which is the more important thing. You're not speaking. So the oxygenated blood, now I'm switching to our understanding, the oxygenated blood, when I'm asleep, is coming from a corpse, basically, who's just breathing to stay alive. And he calls that the power of the blood. So when you're asleep, if you sleep for more than 30 minutes, it's like that a certain amount of the oxygen in the bloodstream is now new, or whatever. I don't know how long it takes, or maybe it's in the tissue. I don't know exactly what the anatomical equivalent would be. But again, this thing is that after 30 minutes, you're now already in a different state. Your blood is now carrying just the oxygen to keep you alive. But it's not the you that is sentient. It's not the you that is davening to Hashem. It's not the you that is aware of God. It's not the higher you. It's the lowest you that there is. And it's just to live. So it says that is called the defiled spirit. Why? Because it's just the lowest level of staying alive. Okay? So now we'll see tomorrow, what does it mean that the soul is in the nostrils, in the nose. And the idea is that there's a residue always of the higher spirit. And the residue stays in the nostrils. Okay, so we'll see this tomorrow.